Early evening draped itself over Abercorn Street with that gentle Savannah kind of light, peach and gold sliding across windshields, a soft breeze carrying cut grass, and a hint of brine from the river. Marcus Ellison stood by Pump 6 at the Shell station, hand resting on the nozzle as the meter rolled past 59, 60, 63. He could feel the hum of the day finally easing out of his shoulders. The courthouse was a half-mile behind him, but the hard conversations he'd carried there always rode home in the passenger seat. Mediation took stamina, the kind of patience that didn't show up on a badge or diploma. You wore it in your voice, in the way you let other people finish their sentences. He'd spent the afternoon easing two families away from a property line like it was a live wire. He'd kept breathing evenly while tempers frayed and memories warped, until the knot unspooled and both sides left with papers they could sign and live with. That was what success looked like on days like this. No winners, no losers, just a sliver of peace. He had promised Danielle he'd be home before 7. Maybe he'd bring coffee, the good kind from the little shop on Habersham, where the barista remembered his name and not his title. The pump clicked off. Marcus didn't move right away. He liked the small quiet of this moment, the steady drip of a nozzle, the smell of gasoline washed thin by spring air, the chitter of a pair of starlings on the light pole above Pump 4. He looked down at his clothes, hoodie, jeans, comfortable sneakers that had gotten him through a long day of standing and listening. In the reflection on the SUV's window, he looked like any man done with his shift, thinking about a bottle of water and the slow drive through oak tunnels toward Midtown. The mirror caught motion. 2 sets of headlights easing in from Abercorn, a cruiser nose-diving toward the far exit, another sliding to a stop, a car length behind Marcus's SUV. Their angles were off for regular fueling. These were cutoff angles, the kind you used when you wanted to hold a space like a hand on a shoulder. Not painful, just not optional. He blinked and stepped back, nozzle still in hand. His first thought was practical. Maybe there was a shoplifting call, a situation in the store, something he should keep out of the way for. The doors of both cruisers opened fast. One officer, sturdy and square-cut, carried his age like authority. The other was taller and thinner, younger by at least a decade, nerves practically telegraphing through his uniform. The older one's presence moved like it had a memory, shoulders set, jaw locked. The younger one looked like he still counted his steps in new shoes. "Sir," the older officer called, voice firm from behind Marcus's left shoulder, "step away from the vehicle." Marcus turned slowly, both palms visible around the nozzle's hose, the key fob still looped on his finger. "Evening, officer. Everything all right?" "Hands where I can see 'em." The older one's tone didn't change. The younger officer, a pace behind, looked from Marcus to the SUV's plate and back again. Marcus lifted his hands, the nozzle's lever releasing a last tired drip. "Here they are. Is this your vehicle?" The older officer was circling already, his eyes cataloging hoodie, shoes, tint, make, model. "It is," Marcus said calmly. "Registered in my name. My license and registration are in the glove compartment." The older officer flicked his chin at his partner. "Check it." The younger one looked apologetic without saying a word. Marcus edged the nozzle back to the pump cradle, movements deliberate and slow. "May I ask what this is about?" "Vehicle matching a description," the older one said, still circling. "Bolo out of the south side." "That's a wide net," Marcus answered. He kept his voice even, not clipped, not warm. "Common car, common color." "Receipt for that gas?" the younger officer asked, eyes flicking to the console. "In the cup holder," Marcus said. "You can—" "Don't move." The older one cut in, sharper now. Across the lot, a high school kid in a sophomore's hoodie stopped short. He'd been cutting across from the fast food place, backpack slung on one shoulder. He took out his phone without a word and held it up, framing Marcus, the SUV, the cruisers. He looked steady the way some kids do, cheeks still soft, eyes already older. Marcus didn't look at the camera. He kept his gaze on the officers and laid his words out like stepping stones. "My driver's license and registration are in the glove compartment. If you'd like to see them, I can reach slowly." "Reach and you'll be resisting," the older officer said. "Turn around." "You're detaining me for fueling my own car?" Marcus asked. The question was a stone dropped in water. It made ripples, not waves. The older one didn't answer. He stepped in, took Marcus by the wrist, and turned it gently but decisively behind his back. Cold metal kissed skin. The younger officer flinched a fraction, then steadied himself and moved toward the passenger door. "Any weapons on you?" the older one asked. "No," Marcus said. "Drugs?" "No." "Been drinking?" "I just left work," he said. "Mediation, Chatham County Courthouse. I'm going home." A door chime sounded from the convenience store. The manager, a woman with a weary kindness, stepped outside and shaded her eyes. "Officers," she called. "He's in here twice a week. You got the wrong idea." Phones lifted, multiplies of a moment. A man near Pump 2 paused with a squeegee in his hand. A woman in a minivan cracked her window. The ordinary rhythm of a gas station. Pump, pay, go. Stuttered, and then went quiet. Marcus felt the finger joints of the cuff pressed together at the base of his wrist. He did not twist. He did not raise his voice. He counted his breaths. The younger officer leaned into the passenger side, retrieved the registration and the license from the glove box. He studied them, turned them once, twice, checked the hologram like he was half hoping to find a flaw so none of this would feel as thin as it did. He glanced up at the older cop, Sergeant Kane, the nameplate read, and spoke softly. "License and reg look legit, Sarge. Plate matches." "People print all kinds of things," Kane said, eyes not leaving Marcus. "We'll sort it out at the station." Marcus looked at the young one. "Officer, what's your name?" "Mills," he said, the word catching briefly in his throat. "Officer Mills," Marcus said, "it would help if you asked me a question before the cuffs." Kane's jaw flexed. "You can explain downtown." Behind them, the kid with the phone shifted his stance, getting the angle right. He didn't call out. He didn't narrate. He just documented, an uninvited witness with a steady hand. The blue spring sky held no clouds. The light hummed off the SUV's hood in a way that made everything feel too clear. Marcus turned his head slightly toward the reflection in the pump's chrome. His own face in pieces, forehead in one shard, the bridge of his nose in another. He'd had days in this city when strangers shook his hand and thanked him for patience they could not summon in themselves. Days when his robe felt like a borrowed weight he was still learning to carry. And he'd had other days, like the afternoon a clerk followed him through a shop, like the time he had to speak his title to stop a security guard's questions. He thought about Danielle's voice that morning, teasing him into an extra slice of toast he didn't want. Her hand on his sleeve. "Don't forget the coffee." He thought about the barista who would call, "Marcus, same as usual?" and then just nod when he said yes. The cuff on his other wrist clicked. He blinked away the sting that comes from being held in place by someone else's assumption, the kind that tries to shrink a man to a description. He lifted his chin a fraction and found the kid's eyes over the phone. He didn't say help. He let the long look say, "Remember." Kane guided him, no shove, just pressure, toward the cruiser. The Shell logo reflected off the cruiser's window in a watery smear of red and yellow. "Sir," Mills said, voice cautious, "we just need to verify some things." "What things?" Marcus asked, gentler than the moment required. "Just protocol," Mills said, and then the word tasted wrong in his mouth. He pressed his lips shut. "Protocol starts with a question," Marcus said softly. "Not a presumption." The manager called again from the store door. "He's a good man," she said, voice rising toward something like a plea. "I can vouch for him." "We appreciate your input, ma'am," Kane answered, not looking at her, not breaking stride. "Step back." A van rolled across the far side of the lot, radio playing soft soul. A pair of dogwoods along the edge flicked their blossoms in the light wind. Marcus felt the vinyl seat under him, the hollow echo of the cruiser door closing. Inside, the air carried a ghost of fries and old coffee. Out the window, Jalen, he would learn the kid's name later, kept recording. Kane walked around to the driver's side. Mills slid in on the passenger side and typed into the computer with fast, neat keystrokes. Marcus sat straight-backed, hands on his lap where he could see them, and breathed. The SUV's key fob dug into his palm and felt heavier than it should have, like he was holding onto something larger than a set of keys. In the lot, a man lifted a toddler into a car seat. The man's eyes cut toward the cruiser and then away. Everyday life went on. Careful, a little thinner. Savannah was good at that, letting beauty run alongside the hard things without making a fuss about it. Live oaks didn't stop arching over the roads because a man got cuffed under them. "You live around here?" Mills asked after a minute. He almost winced at himself, as if his mouth had moved before his brain. Marcus turned his head slightly. "I do." Kane adjusted the rear view, eyes catching Marcus's and holding them for one beat too long. "We'll talk at the station," he said. "Sergeant," Marcus said, polite as a handshake, "what was the exact description on your bolo?" Kane exhaled. "Black male, gray hoodie, silver hybrid, that enough for you?" "For what?" Marcus asked. "For me to do my job," Kane said. His tone bordered on weary, not personal, as if he'd said the line 1,000 times. "Your job begins with seeing what's in front of you," Marcus said. "Not only what you expect to see." That landed between them and went quiet. Mills shifted in his seat. The computer screen reflected blue on the back of his hand. Out by the pumps, the flow of the station stuttered back to life. The manager stepped forward to pick up a piece of litter and stayed there, eyes on the cruiser, on the man inside who came in twice a week and joked about the price of coffee. Jalen lowered his phone for a second, thumb trembling. Not fear, more like anger he didn't know where to put, then raised it again, framing the angles. He would go home and show his mom, and later his mom would tell him where to email the video if someone asked. "Marcus," Danielle would say later tonight, when the air had cooled and the TV was muted, "you can't just let this go." But that was later. For now, the world hovered in the space between the pump and the patrol car. Mills looked back over his shoulder. "Sir," he said, voice almost human again. "Not a line from a manual. We'll clear it up fast if everything matches." "I have no doubt you can," Marcus said. "I'm asking you to choose to." Kane put the cruiser in gear. The tires rolled off the slight lip at the station's exit. The dogwoods nodded at nobody in particular. Traffic on Abercorn flowed past oblivious, a slow line of sedans and pickups headed toward dinner tables and Little League and evening shifts that never made the news. It didn't take long to cross the distance from the pump to the street, but it felt like another kind of distance stretched out inside the car. Marcus rested his head back against the seat and counted the seconds between stoplights. He had a habit of measuring time this way when his mind needed something to hold. 1 light, 2, 3. At the corner, a city bus exhaled at a stop and then pulled away, its windows full of faces in their own middle-of-the-day stories. A woman inside the bus turned her head and focused on the cruiser the way you watch a scene in a play that might not affect the plot, but still makes your heart tap faster. Marcus followed the bus with his eyes until it drifted out of the frame the way ordinary things do. The radio on Kane's belt crackled. Nothing urgent, just voices threading the air. Mills's fingers hovered over the keyboard like he wanted to type something from his chest and knew there wasn't a field for it. The station drew nearer, the low buildings sitting with the kind of square tiredness municipal buildings have. Overhead, the sky deepened toward evening. Somewhere between the Shell station and the turn into the lot, Marcus let himself think about the coffee he wasn't going to get now. He pictured the cup, white paper, brown sleeve, his name written with a little flourish the barista had invented the day she recognized him from the news during some long-ago case he never would have chosen to be public. He thought about the way Danielle sometimes saved him the last cookie, even when Olivia had called dibs. He let those thoughts sit with him because they warmed the edges of the moment. The cruiser rolled to a stop at the back entrance. Mills got out, walked around, and opened the door. He was careful, hands visible, voice low. "Watch your step." Marcus swung his legs out and stood. The cuffs had settled into a rhythm against his wrists. Press, release, press, like a second pulse he couldn't turn off. He straightened the front of his hoodie with his fingers as far as he could. He kept his chin level. A pair of patrol officers near the door looked up. One raised his eyebrows, recognition flashing, the kind that travels faster than a question. The other officer glanced at Kane, then at Mills, then at Marcus, and swallowed like his mouth had gone dry. The fluorescent hallway waited inside with its scuffed baseboards and bulletin boards full of memos nobody read. Marcus knew these hallways. Not intimately, not like a detective or a clerk, but enough to map the room numbers and the smells. Burnt coffee, printer toner, something lemon that never fully overcame what came before. He knew which interior window funneled morning light into a corridor in a way that made even bad news feel a little less sharp. He'd toured the station months ago for a civic committee, shaking hands, nodding at briefings, thankful for service, and mindful of the stories hidden between the lines. Kane's hand landed on his shoulder, a guide, not a shove, and steered him toward the intake room. Marcus walked without hurry. Mills kept pace on the other side, half a step back, eyes catching the eyes that watched them pass. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang and rang. Somewhere else, a printer spit 3 pages and then jammed. In a city like Savannah, the bones of buildings remember things and hold on to them in their paint. Marcus felt that weight and recognized it. He didn't twist against the cuffs. He didn't ask for anything. He let the moment stand, tall and unhidden. Behind them, beyond the glass doors, the sky's gold bled into a softer blue. The day started to fold itself neatly for the night. Jalen would leave the Shell station a few minutes later, breath fast, heart faster, fingers still tingling. He would watch his video 1 time, then 2, then send it to his mom with 3 words. This happened today. Across town, 1,000 small lives would be moving along their tracks toward dinner tables and bedtime stories. The city would tuck in around them all the way it always did, cradling the sweet with the hard. In the intake room, a clipboard knocked lightly against a counter. Mills shifted his weight and then forced himself still. Kane was already talking to a desk sergeant, not loud, not soft. Words about procedure, descriptions about safety, phrases that made sense stacked on other phrases until meaning got slippery. Marcus listened without reacting, the way you listen to a thundercloud when you can't tell yet if it will break your way. He took a breath, then another. He let his gaze settle on the corkboard above the sergeant's desk, an array of community notices and safety tips, and a flyer for a charity softball game scheduled for a Saturday 2 weeks from now. He thought about how the world could carry all these things at once, the fundraiser and the cuffs, the dogwoods and the report forms, without sorting them first. The room stilled. Kane turned. Mills turned. The air dropped an inch in temperature. Marcus felt the space between what a person believes about himself and what other people decide to see narrowing into a wire. He knew better than to think he could change anyone's mind in a hallway. That wasn't the point. The point was to stay whole. He kept his voice even. "Officer Mills," he said, "I'm going to ask you to look at my wallet again, and then I'm going to ask you a question." The younger man blinked. "What's the question, sir?" "If everything you see in that wallet were on a man who didn't look like me," Marcus said, "would we be standing in this room?" Mills swallowed. Kane pinched the bridge of his nose and let go quickly, as if he'd allowed something human to show that he meant to keep indoors. The desk sergeant cleared his throat and looked at his shoes. Marcus straightened his shoulders, the way he always did when he stepped to a bench, when he said good morning to a crowded courtroom, when he told 2 angry neighbors they had to share a fence nobody liked. The words came out of him without hurry, just full. "I'll cooperate fully," he said. "I always do." No one answered for a beat. In that beat, the hum of the fluorescent light took over, and the world was made mostly of breath and the tick of a wall clock above a door. Then Kane moved. The shape of his decision showed up first in his posture, then in his eyes. then in his hand, which settled at Marcus's elbow with finality. "Sir, we're taking you in," Kane said flatly, as the cuffs clicked shut. Marcus sat in the small interview room, elbows resting on the chipped laminate table, the faint smell of stale coffee drifting in from somewhere down the hall. The hum of the fluorescent light above was steady, but not quite in sync with the thump of his pulse. Through the narrow glass panel in the door, he could see movement. Shadows crossing, the occasional shape of an officer pausing to look in, then moving on. It was strange how quiet a police station could feel from the inside. Out on the street, the building loomed with authority, radios squawking, patrol cars rolling in and out. But here, in this plain room, time seemed to loosen. It was a different kind of stillness, one that didn't comfort. The door opened without a knock. Detective Laura Perez stepped in, her leather badge holder swinging slightly from a chain around her neck. She was in her 40s, hair pulled back, a no-nonsense set to her jaw. Marcus had seen her around the courthouse before, usually when she was testifying in cases that involved her investigations. "Judge Ellison," she said, pulling out the chair opposite him. "You okay?" Marcus gave the smallest shrug. "I've had better days." Perez set a thin file on the table but didn't open it. "They didn't run your plates before putting you in cuffs." "I gathered that," Marcus said. Her eyes narrowed. "Kane says you matched the bolo. That's be on the lookout. I'm sure you know." "But I checked. The bolo didn't even have a license plate number. Just silver hybrid, male driver, gray hoodie. That could describe half this city on a Tuesday." Marcus let the silence speak for him. Perez leaned in. "You want my advice? Make this official. Internal Affairs is going to need to hear it from you directly." "I'm considering it," Marcus said. "But this isn't just about me." "I figured you'd say that," Perez said, sitting back, "which is why I called Harris." Lieutenant Monica Harris arrived 5 minutes later, file folder in one hand, a paper coffee cup in the other. She had the posture of someone who'd spent years keeping her voice even, no matter the situation. She placed the coffee in front of Marcus. "Judge," she said by way of greeting. "Lieutenant." She sat beside Perez. "I want you to know this is already in motion. That kid at the gas station, Jalen Carter, I think, his video's all over local Facebook groups. I'd be surprised if it doesn't make the evening news." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Harris nodded. "Things travel, especially when they show someone in a hoodie and cuffs before anyone asks a question." He took a sip of the coffee, letting the bitterness ground him. "What do you need from me?" "A statement. Now, while it's fresh." Marcus glanced toward the glass panel. Kane walked by, not looking in. "This isn't about bruises or broken bones," Marcus said. "It's about how quickly some people decide what they're seeing." Perez gave a slow nod. "You thinking of taking this to the Oversight Committee?" "I'm thinking," Marcus said, "that if I do nothing, then nothing changes." Across town, Danielle Ellison was already on the move. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from friends, colleagues, even a reporter she vaguely remembered meeting at a fundraiser. She ignored most of them, focusing instead on navigating evening traffic toward the precinct. When she walked through the front doors, she didn't need to ask where Marcus was. Perez was waiting in the lobby. "He's okay," Perez said before Danielle could speak. Danielle exhaled through her nose. "That's not the same as, this never should have happened." Perez didn't argue. "He's in with Harris right now. You can see him in a few." Danielle's gaze slid past Perez to where Kane was leaning against a desk, talking to another officer as if the day were ordinary. Her jaw tightened. Back in the interview room, Harris clicked her pen. "Judge, I'll be blunt. If you go forward with this, it's going to get messy. Kane's been here 15 years. He's got friends. Mills is new, but he's not going to want to contradict his partner." Marcus met her eyes. "Messy's fine. I've mediated messier." Harris allowed herself a half smile. Fair enough. We'll set a preliminary misconduct review for tomorrow morning. Public, per policy. You presiding. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Good. By the time Danielle was allowed in, the coffee in front of Marcus had gone cold. She didn't speak right away, just crossed the room and took his hand in both of hers. You all right? She asked. Physically, he said. That's not the same as all right. No, he agreed. They stayed like that for a moment, the hum of the light overhead filling the silence. Then Danielle's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and shook her head. It's already on Channel 7. Marcus looked down at their joined hands. Then I guess tomorrow's going to be interesting. Outside the precinct, evening had settled over Savannah, street lamps flickering on one by one. In the parking lot, Jalen Carter sat in the passenger seat of his mother's car, phone in hand, watching the view count on his video climb into the tens of thousands. He looked up at the building, jaw set. They're not going to bury this, he murmured. His mother started the engine. Then you'd better be ready to say that in front of a room full of uniforms. The morning air carried that crisp, salt-tinged breeze Savannah was known for. By the time Marcus stepped out of his townhouse, a small crowd had already gathered 2 blocks from the courthouse. Some held signs, respect without rank, justice is blind or should be. Others just clutched coffee cups and murmured among themselves. The video had been on every local channel the night before, and now the story had a pulse of its own. Danielle pulled the Prius to the curb, avoiding the media vans that had claimed the front spots. Marcus adjusted the cuffs of his dark suit. You don't have to stay, he told her. Her look said otherwise. Not a chance. Inside, the courthouse buzzed. Security officers checked bags with a little more thoroughness than usual, eyes scanning for trouble. Marcus moved through it with the calm of someone who'd walked these halls for years, but this time there was an undercurrent. Eyes lingering longer, whispers following him up the stairs. In courtroom 2B, the seating was already full. Press in the back, law students along the side, and in the front row, Jalen Carter sat next to his mother, his phone face down for once. He looked younger without the defiant set of his jaw, but his eyes tracked every movement. At the defense table sat Sergeant Richard Kane and Officer Jacob Mills, each with their respective attorneys. Kane looked carved from stone, jaw locked, gaze fixed forward. Mills fidgeted, tugging at his tie. The bailiff's call, "All rise," rippled through the room. Marcus entered from the side door, robe settling over his shoulders. He didn't look at the cameras. His eyes went straight to the defense table. "You may be seated," he said, voice carrying without effort. "This is a preliminary misconduct review regarding the events of Tuesday afternoon involving Sergeant Kane and Officer Mills. This is not a criminal trial, but findings here may be referred for further action." He opened the folder in front of him. "We have body camera footage, the public recording, dispatch logs, and 6 eyewitness statements. We will hear from the witnesses directly." The first to testify was Jalen. He rose when called, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor. After being sworn in, he glanced toward Marcus. "I saw him pumping gas," Jalen began. "That's it. Then the cops pulled up fast like they were already mad. No questions, no license check, just cuffs." "Did you see me resist in any way?" Marcus asked. "No, sir." "Did either officer ask for my identification before applying handcuffs?" Jalen shook his head. "Nope. They treated you like you were already guilty." A low murmur spread through the gallery. Marcus raised a hand for silence. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." Detective Paris testified next, her voice crisp. Protocol was not followed. They should have approached, asked for ID, and verified the vehicle before any detention. There was no urgent threat, no fleeing suspect. "And Sergeant Kane?" Marcus asked. "This is not his first questionable stop," Perez said. "4th in 6 years." Kane's attorney objected, but Marcus overruled. "Noted. Continue." Then it was the officer's turn. "Kane," Marcus said, "did you run my plates before the arrest?" "No," Kane said flatly. "Why not?" "Officer safety," Kane replied. "The suspect could have driven off." "Suspect?" Marcus's voice was steady. "You mean me?" Kane's jaw tightened. "Yes." Marcus let the silence hang before turning to Mills. "Officer Mills, did you believe this was a lawful arrest?" Mills swallowed. "At the time, yes." "And now?" Mills' eyes dropped. "No, sir." A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Just as Marcus was about to proceed, the bailiff approached with a slip of paper. "Your Honor, a new witness has arrived. Says she was at the gas station that day." Marcus glanced at the name and felt the shift in the room before he said it aloud. "Call Mrs. Eleanor Rios." An elderly woman with a cane made her way forward, moving slowly but with purpose. After being sworn in, she fixed Kane with a gaze that could have cut glass. "I was 2 pumps over," she said. "I saw you put cuffs on this man without a word. I told you then he wasn't who you thought. You told me to mind my business." Kane shifted in his seat. Mrs. Rios turned to the bench. "Judge, I've lived here 50 years. I know what I saw, and I've seen it too many times." The room was silent, except for the faint click of a camera shutter. Marcus folded his hands. "Sergeant Kane, Officer Mills, you've heard the witnesses, seen the footage. This is your last opportunity to speak directly." Mills looked up, voice low. "I was wrong. I should have said something." Kane stared straight ahead. "I acted within my training." Marcus's gaze was steady. "Then perhaps your training needs review." Before Marcus could close the hearing, a man in a dark suit slipped into the back row. Perez noticed him first. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Price, a federal badge glinting at his belt. He leaned toward the clerk, murmured something, and the clerk's eyes widened. Marcus saw the exchange, and his pulse ticked up. If the feds were here, this was no longer just Savannah's problem. The courthouse air felt different by mid-morning, like the room itself had learned to hold its breath. Marcus glanced down at his phone before stepping through the side door. One text from Olivia, time-stamped 8:51 a.m. "Tom, say what they won't." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, lifted his chin, and moved into courtroom 2B. The murmur flattened to silence. "All rise." The robe settled across his shoulders the way it always did, more responsibility than armor. He took his seat without scanning the crowd, though he felt the cameras, the notepads, the 100 unblinking eyes. He also felt something else, new weight at the back of the room, a presence that had not been there yesterday. He didn't look at it yet. "You may be seated," Marcus said, the quiet absorbing his voice cleanly. "We will resume." At the defense table, Kane sat rigid, the line of his jaw unbudged. Mills's tie had shifted a half-inch since the hour before. His fingers kept smoothing it back into place, as if the fabric held the day's only thing he could control. Their attorneys flanked them with that strange legal stillness, alert and at rest at the same time. Marcus folded his hands. "For the record, we have received an additional eyewitness statement since our recess. We will hear it after we review the body camera footage." In the back row, Detective Perez passed a flash drive to the clerk, who connected it to the monitor on the wall. The screen flickered, then steadied on the inside of a windshield. Blue sky, the Shell logo across the lot, 2 figures at pump 6. The room dimmed as shades were lowered. Sunlight became a thoughtful gray. The video showed what everyone already knew, but it carried its own cold clarity. The angles, the timing, the way the cruisers parked nose and tail, the measure of footsteps that said urgency before anyone had spoken. It showed Kane's hand resting near his holster out of habit, Mills glancing between the plate and the man. It showed the opening line, the hands raised, the refusal to allow a simple reach for an ID. It showed the cuffs, metal flash, wrist, click. "Pause," Marcus said. The footage froze on the frame where the light bounced off the SUV's curve. "Officer Mills, identify where in the interaction you requested identification." Mills leaned toward the screen as if proximity could change content. "I didn't, Your Honor." "And Sergeant Kane," Marcus said, turning his gaze, Identify where in the interaction you or your partner verified the vehicle's registration before placing the subject in handcuffs. Kane's mouth thinned. We were acting under a bolo. Which did not include a plate, Marcus said. Which named a car model owned by thousands in this county. Kane's attorney rose. Your Honor, with respect, the officers are trained to control a situation first. Marcus lifted a palm, even. We are not debating whether officers have a duty to maintain safety. We are clarifying whether that duty excuses skipping the first step of policy, to ask, to verify before escalating. He nodded to the clerk. The video resumed. The shell manager's silhouette appeared in the doorway, a hand lifted. Her mouth moved. No audio there. But the second angle provided it. The boy's phone from across the lot. He's in here twice a week. You got the wrong idea. The gallery breathed together. A soft wave. Marcus watched the young man in the video, Jalen, hold his phone steady. Courage doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like not blinking. The clip ended. The screen went black, and everyone saw their own reflections for a beat, pale versions ghosted against the glass. Thank you, Marcus said. We'll now hear from the additional witness. The bailiff opened the side door. A woman in her 50s walked in, posture straight, the kind of no-nonsense steadiness you pick up running a business that opens early and closes late. Her name tag from the shell read Margaret. After she was sworn in, Marcus spoke gently. Miss Whitfield, you manage the shell station on Abercorn? For 6 years, she said. I've seen more people in and out of that lot than I can count. Were you present during the incident involving the respondent officers and the complainant on Tuesday afternoon? I was behind the counter, she said. I came to the door when I noticed the way the patrol cars parked. It didn't look like a regular check-in. And what did you see? I saw this man. She turned to Marcus, then back. Pumping gas, hands up when asked. Calm. I also saw you, she gestured toward Kane, decide he was a problem before he spoke a full sentence. Kane's attorney stood. Objection to characterization. Sustained as to characterization, Marcus said. Then to Margaret, please stick to observations. I saw cuffs before I saw questions, she said. I told the officers he's irregular. They told me to step back. Marcus nodded once. Ms. Whitfield, have you seen the complainant at your station before that day? Twice a week, she said. Sometimes more. And he always jokes about the price of coffee like it was going down someday. Several in the gallery smiled despite themselves, then schooled their faces, reminded of the room they were in. No further questions, Marcus said. Kane's attorney approached. Ms. Whitfield, is your station in an area known for theft? We've had our share, she said. We also have people coming home from work who want a bottle of water and a quiet minute at the pump. They look like all kinds of people. All kinds. Nothing further, the attorney said, tone precise. Perez returned to her seat. Her expression didn't triumph. It steadied. The facts were doing what facts do when you let them. Marcus let the stillness settle. He felt Danielle's presence in the front row. He knew the slope of her shoulders from across any room. He also felt that new weight again at the back. The clerk had passed him a note earlier with a name scribbled on it, and he'd tucked it beneath his legal pad. He lifted it now. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Price. He set the note down where it belonged, on the record's edge, and looked up at the back row. Mr. Price, he said, voice even, unless you intended to observe only, the court will hear the nature of your presence. A stir rippled through the room. Price rose, buttoning his jacket with the detached neatness of someone who'd spent a career being listened to. He carried his badge like it weighed nothing and everything. Your Honor, Price said, stepping into the aisle, the U.S. Attorney's Office is monitoring this matter in coordination with the Civil Rights Division. We are not here to interfere. We are here to observe whether federal interests may be implicated. Kane's attorney bristled. On what basis? Price turned mildly. Pattern or practice investigations are not launched from podium statements, counsel. Today we watch. Tomorrow we decide whether to request files. Marcus nodded once. "Thank you for your transparency, Mr. Price. You are welcome to remain." If anyone had thought this was merely a Savannah story, that thought thinned. Marcus returned to the table. "We will proceed." He set his pen down, a quiet metronome. "Sergeant Kane, you may address the court." Kane's attorney stood first, speaking by reflex. "Your Honor, my client asserts he acted within the bounds of his training and in good faith. Split-second decisions—" "This was not split-second," Marcus said, not unkindly. "It lasted minutes." The attorney recalibrated. "Public safety requires officers to control a scene where a suspect could flee in a vehicle." Marcus shifted his gaze to Kane. "Sergeant, this is your opportunity, not your attorney's." Kane's posture never dipped. "We had a vehicle, a description, and a duty," he said. "I made the call to secure the subject. No harm done." A breath pulled inward across the room, collective and quiet. Marcus let the words sit where they'd been placed. "No harm?" he repeated, gentle as a teacher who knows the answer and wants the student to hear it, not just say it. "Sergeant, harm does not require bruises. Harm can look like handcuffs put on a citizen without a question asked. Harm can be the memory they carry home. It can be the message it writes on a community that watched." Kane's eyes flicked, the smallest motion, toward the back where uniforms clustered, toward the front where Danielle watched, toward the side where Mills sat with his hands folded like prayer without a sanctuary. "Officer Mills," Marcus said, softening his tone by a degree, "earlier you answered that at the time you believed the arrest lawful, and now you do not. Do you wish to expand on that?" Mills' attorney put a hand on his forearm. "Officer, you are under no obligation." Mills leaned toward the microphone. "I am new. Sergeant Kane has done this job longer than I've been out of academy. I thought questioning him in that moment would put both of us at risk." "Risk of what?" Marcus asked. "Of losing his trust," Mills said. His face flushed, but his voice held. "Of being the partner who second-guessed in the field." "And what was the risk to the man at the pump?" Mills didn't look at Marcus. He looked at the screen that now only reflected the room. "The risk was he'd go home and remember the cuffs more than he remembered the gas station," he said, barely above a whisper. Kane's attorney spoke briskly. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess before further questioning." "Denied," Marcus said, not punitively. "We are not here to bury anyone. We are here to lift what's true into light." He turned to Perez. "Detective, you spent 5 years in internal affairs. In your experience, what correct first step would have reduced the risk to officer and citizen alike?" "Ask for ID," she said. "Then run the plate. Approach calm. You can control a scene without cuffs." "Is there training on the difference between control and escalation?" "Yes," she said. "There is. Whether it's followed—" She let the sentence breathe and then finish itself in the listeners' minds. Marcus took a breath of his own. He thought of Olivia's text. He thought of all the quiet ways a community decides what it is, one small encounter at a time. He thought of his father's hands on a steering wheel decades ago and a roadside stop in another county. No phones then, no witnesses but pines and sky, and the way his father had told the story later, like it was a weather report he had to deliver without scaring anyone. He looked down at his notes. The legal pad held neat rows of questions. At the bottom of the page, underlined twice, he'd copied the one that belonged less to the record and more to the human heart. Would this have happened if he looked like you? He didn't ask it, not yet. "Members of the public," he said, addressing the gallery because this room was bigger than 2 names on a table. "If you came here today for a spectacle, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Fairness is quieter than a spectacle. It is also heavier. The weight of it lands on all of us." He let the words settle where they needed to. An older man in the second row, Sunday suit, cane across his knees, sat a fraction taller. A grad student in the back wiped her eyes like she wasn't sure why she was crying in a room where no one had raised a voice. "Lieutenant Harris," Marcus said, turning to the side aisle where she stood, For the record, has the Oversight Committee scheduled any follow-on review beyond today? Harris lifted a folder. Yes, Your Honor. An internal disciplinary review is prepared pending this court's findings. We also have a standing MOU with the Department of Justice to transmit materials upon request. Price inclined his head a millimeter, the kind of tiny federal nod that means everything is being written down somewhere else, too. Marcus returned to the officers. Sergeant Kane, he said, your counsel has characterized your decision as good faith under training. For the sake of those who do this job and want to do it right, tell us where your training would have allowed a different call. Kane's jaw worked once. We live in a world where hesitation gets officers killed, he said. I don't apologize for acting first. No one is asking you to apologize for staying alive, Marcus said. We are asking you to define the line between staying alive and forgetting the first rule of the profession you chose. See before you decide. A long second ticked on the clock above the door. The courtroom held it like a delicate cup. Danielle unclasped her hands in the front row and clasped them again. The motion was small, but Marcus felt it the way you feel the tide in your knees on a dock. No sound. Only the change in pressure. Very well, Marcus said at last. The court will take a 15-minute recess before closing statements. He rapped the gavel once, light. The room exhaled. Voices rose, not loud, but layered. Chairs scraped. Reporters angled toward the hall. Perez slid up to the bench as the bailiff called the recess and leaned in with quiet urgency. Judge, there's one more piece, she said under her breath. A memo from training last fall, attendance logs, sign-ins. It shows Kane skipped the de-escalation refresher. Do you have it? Marcus asked. Yes, she said, tapping a folder. And something else. Mills was there, with perfect scores on the scenario test. He knew better. Marcus felt the information slot into the morning's architecture like a last beam. He nodded. Bring it in after recess. He stood, turned, and stepped through the side door into chambers. The sudden hush behind the closed wood felt like a different climate. He removed his robe, folded it over the chair back, and walked to the window. Forsyth Park's canopy pressed the skyline into softness, live oaks filtering light like a benediction. He rubbed the faint red groove on his wrist where the cuff had rested yesterday and then stopped, letting his hands drop. A soft knock. Danielle stepped in. The bailiff must have allowed her, reading the moment as what it was. Not legal. Human. You all right? She asked. I will be, he said. She stepped close, straightened a corner of his collar that didn't require straightening, and searched his face as if looking for the boy he used to be. Whatever you say in there, she said, make sure it's something you'll be proud of when the room is empty again. He smiled with one side of his mouth. That's always the trick. Liv texted? She asked. He nodded. Say what they won't. Then do it, Danielle said simply. Say it so the people who need to hear it can't pretend they didn't. He took her hand, held it for a beat, and let go. I'll see you out there. When he returned to the bench, the room assembled itself into order a shade faster than before, like even the furniture wanted to stand straighter. The bailiff called the room to rise, and Marcus took his seat. We are back on the record, he said. Detective Perez, please submit the training memo and attendance logs to the clerk. Perez did. The clerk handed Marcus the copies. He read quickly, the way you read when you've been reading your whole life for the sentence that matters. He looked up. Sergeant Kane, he said, attendance shows you did not complete the de-escalation refresher last fall. Kane's attorney interjected. Scheduling conflict, Your Honor. Shift coverage. Noted, Marcus said, expression unchanged. Officer Mills, you attended and passed with high marks. Mills's throat moved. Yes, sir. Would you like to revise any part of your earlier answer? Marcus asked. Mills looked down at his hands. His knuckles were pale where his fingers pressed together. When he looked up, the room felt not quite the same. "Yes," he said, voice clear now. "I should have said something at the pump. I didn't. That's on me." Kane's head turned, slow, disbelieving. A murmur edged along the back row like a draft, and then the room stilled again because no one wanted to miss the next sentence. "Officer," Marcus said, "you may find that accountability is not the end of your usefulness, but the beginning of it." He closed the folder. The shape of the morning had fully formed. There was only one part left to carve. Marcus drew breath for the decision, and stopped when the side door opened a fraction and the clerk hurried a note to his hand, face pinched with apology at the interruption. He scanned the line of handwriting and felt the world tilt half a degree. He looked to the gallery, to a familiar profile he hadn't expected to see in this context, in this room, while he was the one holding the gavel. "Detective Laura Perez," he said, voice level but carrying a thread of something newer. "Please return to the stand for one final question." She did, eyes steady. Marcus rested his fingers lightly on the bench. "Detective," he said, "for the sake of the record and the training of every officer who will read it, tell this court in one sentence what the first duty of a badge is." Perez didn't hesitate. To see the person, not the presumption. Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you." He turned to the defense table, feeling the courtroom lean with him. "Sergeant Kane," he said, the room narrowing to the dark wood, the two uniforms, and the silence between them. "Now, before this court issues its findings, let's hear from you." The Ellison house sat on a quiet street in Ardsley Park, where the oaks bent over the road and the Spanish moss swayed in the evening breeze. Inside, the news was on, but the sound was low. CNN running a split screen of Marcus's face from the courthouse that morning and stock footage of Savannah PD cruisers rolling down Bull Street. Danielle stood at the stove, stirring a pot of gumbo. "Every channel's got it," she said without looking up. Marcus sank into the couch, loosening his tie. "I know." On the coffee table, their daughter Maya's textbooks were spread open, but she was scrolling her phone instead. "Dad, someone just posted a meme of you in a hoodie with the caption, 'Savannah's Batman.' It's kind of weird." Marcus smiled faintly. "Better than Savannah's criminal." Danielle shot him a look. "Don't joke." The smell of garlic and sausage filled the room, but underneath it there was that static buzz of tension, like everyone was pretending this was just another weeknight. The knock came at 8:47 p.m. 2 quick taps, then one. Marcus opened the door to find Detective Perez, a baseball cap pulled low. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. He stepped aside. "What's going on?" Perez pulled a small USB drive from her jacket pocket and set it on the coffee table. "Anonymous drop. Left in my department mailbox this afternoon. No note." Marcus picked it up. "What's on it?" "Body cam footage. Not yours. Someone else's. From about 8 months ago." Danielle leaned against the counter, arms folded. "What's in the footage?" Perez hesitated. Kane, traffic stop. White male, mid-20s, in a beat-up sedan. Kane gets aggressive, asks him out of the car, starts a search. Then he sees the guy's license, realizes he's the son of Judge Harold Kent. Whole thing changes, polite, apologizing, sends him on his way. Marcus turned the USB in his fingers. Who sent it? "No idea, but whoever it was, they want this out." In his study, Marcus plugged the drive into his laptop. The grainy video filled the screen. Kane's voice barking orders, the driver's hands trembling on the steering wheel. Then the pivot, almost comical, if it weren't so revealing. The moment Kane read the license, his tone softened like a switch had been flipped. Danielle stood behind Marcus, watching over his shoulder. "It's the same car Kane claimed was suspicious in your stop. Same make and model." Perez nodded. "This blows a hole in his credibility. Shows selective enforcement." Marcus closed the laptop. "If we use it." "You're worried about the source," Perez said. "Anonymous means chain of custody issues. And if it was leaked illegally, it could backfire. Or," Perez countered, "it could show the public exactly what they're dealing with." Later, After Perez left, Marcus sat at the dining table with the lights low. Danielle brought him tea. "You've been quiet," she said. "Just thinking about the risk," he said. "If this came from inside the department, someone's already in danger." Danielle rested her hand on his. "So are you." He didn't answer. At 10:12 p.m., Marcus's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop now, or we come for them." No signature, no context needed. His gut told him exactly what it meant. He forwarded the message to Perez, then deleted it from his phone. No need for Danielle to see it tonight. The house was still when Marcus went to check the mailbox around 10:30. The air was cooler now, the street lamp casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The mailbox creaked as he opened it. Inside was a single manila envelope. No return address. He brought it inside, sat at the table, and slid a finger under the flap. Out spilled a single photograph. Danielle and Maya, walking down Broughton Street that afternoon, laughing about something. It was taken from a distance, the kind of angle that said whoever held the camera had been following them. Across the bottom, in neat black marker, "We're watching." Marcus stared at it for a long time, the sound of the refrigerator humming in the background. Danielle's footsteps approached from the hallway. "Who was at the door?" she asked. He slid the photo back into the envelope before she could see. Marcus looked up at her, forcing a steady voice. "Just junk mail." But his fingers tightened around the envelope, and he knew, whatever fight he'd stepped into, it had just gotten personal. The morning came in soft and blue, the kind of Savannah light that made even the brickwork look rested. Marcus was already awake when the kettle clicked off. He stood at the kitchen window, watching a pair of joggers pass under the oak limbs outside, their breath making small clouds in the cool air. On the table behind him, an envelope sat inside a clean plastic sleeve Detective Perez had dropped off before sunrise, her mouth a hard line when she saw what had been slid into his mailbox the night before. Danielle poured the hot water over tea, the steam curling up like a quiet prayer. "You going to tell Liv?" "Not yet," Marcus said. "She's got a midterm. She doesn't need this in her head." Danielle set a hand flat on the table near the sleeve without touching it. The photograph inside, Danielle and Olivia on Broughton Street, heads tipped toward each other mid-laughter, an ordinary mother-daughter moment captured by a stranger, looked almost innocent without the marker scrawl beneath it. "We're watching." "You gave the text to Harris?" she asked. "Forwarded. She's looping in cybercrimes," Marcus said. "Perez is checking nearby cameras along our block." Danielle slid him a mug. "You sure you still want to preside today?" Marcus took the mug and let the heat wash into his fingers. "Want is not the word," he said. "But yes." She studied his face, then smoothed the front of his jacket, even though it didn't need smoothing. "Say it the way only you can," she said softly. "Say it so it lands." He nodded, something small and certain, and picked up the sleeve with the photo. He placed it into his briefcase, not because it needed to be in court, but because leaving it behind felt like pretending it had not happened. They rode downtown mostly in silence, the Prius sliding through early traffic and under canopies that turned sunlight into a dappling. At a stoplight, a bus wheezed, releasing passengers with backpacks and lunch pails. Life moved. It always did. Inside courtroom 2B, the murmurs rose and fell like tide against a seawall. Reporters had multiplied. So had the faces Marcus didn't recognize. Tourists who had added a courthouse hearing to their list of Savannah sites, activists from out of town, retirees who rarely missed a morning docket because the law, in its way, was their favorite long-running show. All rise. The robe felt heavier today, and lighter, both at once. Marcus took the bench, let the room right itself, and said, "You may be seated." He ought to have gone straight to findings. That would have been cleaner, mechanically speaking. But a courtroom is a room full of people first, and machines second. He saw Jalen Carter in the front row with his mother, his phone at last stuffed into a pocket. He saw Lieutenant Harris near the aisle, posture watchful. He saw Assistant U.S. Attorney Price in the rear corner, patient as a chess player. He saw Danielle, hands folded in her lap, the line of her shoulders telling him she'd slept little and would not say so. He also saw Sergeant Richard Kane and Officer Jacob Mills, two men who had put on uniforms that morning and stood in front of their bathroom mirrors, faces no doubt as ordinary as any faces shaving, straightening a collar, making an agreement with the day. Their attorneys were poised like punctuation. "This court reconvenes," he said. "We begin with 2 matters of housekeeping." He glanced to the clerk, who handed up a small clear bag. "First, for the record, an anonymous threat was delivered to my home last evening. It has been turned over to Lieutenant Harris and is not, at this time, part of this review. Second, additional training documents regarding de-escalation have been received. They have been admitted as exhibits." A ripple, then stillness. "Now," Marcus said, and the words settled the room like a hand on a shoulder, "we proceed to conclusions." He could feel the relief from some quarters. Finality promised. He could also feel the dread humming beneath in others. He straightened his notes not because he needed to read from them, but because the motion let the moment breathe. "This review considered 4 things," he said evenly. "The public recording from the gas station, the officer's body camera footage, witness testimony, including from a bystander and the station manager, and departmental records, including training attendance." He paused, letting the list become something more than items. The question was not, is law enforcement a hard job? It is. The question was, did these officers follow the policy that protects both the public and themselves? He looked first at Mills, because the human heart often requires mercy before it can hear justice. "Officer Jacob Mills," he said, "you failed to intervene when policy and training would have had you ask the first question and run the first check. You admitted that failure on this record. You attended de-escalation training and scored with distinction. You knew better." A whisper trickled along the back row. He waited it out. "This court recommends immediate reassignment to desk duty, mandatory remedial training with a mentor officer outside your direct chain, and a formal letter of reprimand in your file. Further, I recommend your next evaluation specifically measure intervention under policy when encountering senior partners. That is not disloyalty. That is maturity." Mills's shoulders rose and fell once. It wasn't relief. It was acceptance with room for change inside it. Marcus turned to Kane. Even the room seemed to lean. "Sergeant Richard Kane," he said, and the name rung in the wood. "The record shows you initiated a detention without verifying identity or registration, despite no exigent threat and no plate match in the bolo you cite. Your body camera captures escalation before inquiry. Training records show you did not complete required de-escalation training last fall." He let his voice thin by a hair, not to make it harsh, but to make each word carry like a stone skipping on flat water. "This court recommends immediate suspension pending internal affairs review of this incident and 3 prior stops with similar characteristics. I also recommend referral to the State Peace Officer Standards and Training Council for evaluation of continued certification." Kane's attorney half rose. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may appeal these recommendations to the Oversight Committee," Marcus said. "You may also reflect." He kept his gaze on Kane, not unkind, simply unbroken. "The badge asks a great deal of a person. It asks you to stand in the space between chaos and quiet and keep both honest. It asks you to see people, not caricatures, to discern which part of your training fits the exact size of the moment in front of you. That is courage. Cuffs are easy. Questions are work." He turned from the table to the room. "To the public, you do not need a title for your dignity. You do not need a robe for your rights. Respect is not rented by rank." He let the sentence hang for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then he lifted the gavel and tapped once. "These are the findings of this court. The record will reflect them, and appropriate referrals will issue today. This hearing is closed." The quiet held longer than usual. The first sound back into the world was a chair leg scraping softly. Then someone near the back exhaled like they'd been underwater. A single pair of hands clapped once. Reflex, not performance. Then stilled. The wave did not build. It didn't need to. The silence was its own verdict. Marcus stood. He saw Jalen's chin lift in a nod. No one would quote. He saw the station manager press a tissue to the corner of one eye with a small, almost embarrassed smile. He saw Mill's hands, empty now, uncurl in his lap. He saw Kane stare at the table's edge like it had changed shape. He left through the side door, the robe whispering across his trousers. In chambers, he slid it from his shoulders and hung it with the care of someone leaving a room tidy for the next person. Perez was waiting near the window, Harris beside her. Price stood a respectful step away, hands folded. "Protection for your family's been arranged," Harris said without prelude. "Marked car on the block tonight, plainclothes during the day for a few days. Cameras near your street are pulling footage." "Thank you," Marcus said. He set the briefcase on the desk. "And the USB?" "We've preserved the metadata," Perez said. "Chain of custody is shaky, but the footage is real. Internal Affairs will have to explain why it never surfaced." Price cleared his throat. "My office is requesting materials. Today wasn't an endpoint, Judge. It was documentation." "I assumed as much," Marcus said. "You'll get what the law allows." Price nodded and left as quietly as he'd entered. Perez lingered, her eyes softening for the first time all week. "You did what needed doing," she said. "I did what the record required," Marcus said, "and what I could live with." Perez smiled a little. "That too." She squeezed his forearm, quick, human, and stepped out. Harris remained. "We'll keep you updated on the threats. And Judge?" She hesitated. "I know restraint when I see it. Not everyone could have held the line that way." "Restraint is just another word for trust," Marcus said. "In the process, in the people watching." When she left, the room finally felt like a room again. 4 walls, a desk, 2 chairs, a coat tree. Danielle slipped in, closing the door softly. "You hungry?" she asked. "Strangely, yes." "Coffee first?" she said, smile warming into her eyes. "Always." They drove to the small cafe on Habersham, where they both knew the chalkboard menu by heart. The barista glanced up, recognition flickering. But she didn't widen her eyes or whisper to the coworker. She just said, "Hey, Marcus, same as usual?" "Same as usual," he said, grateful for the kindness of ordinary. They took a small table by the window. Outside, spring worked quietly on the city, petals piling in corners, a bicycle bell somewhere out of sight. Danielle reached across the table, palm up. He set his hand in hers. "Do you remember," she said, "that first month after you were appointed, when you came home convinced you'd mispronounced half the names on the docket?" "I still might be," he said, and she laughed, a sound that unclenched something in his chest. "Today," she said, voice softening, "you didn't mispronounce anything that mattered." He sat with that, let it settle. Through the window, a group of teenagers ambled past, backpacks thumping, the future oblivious to the weight of the present. He wondered which one would end up doing this work someday, or standing on a different side of the bench, or holding a phone steady when it counted. They walked out with their cups, steam trailing into the cool, and turned toward the square. As they neared the courthouse steps, the crowd from earlier had thinned to clusters, pairs on benches, a small knot of reporters packing up, a man with a sketchbook capturing the columns in quick lines. On the sidewalk near the entrance, a young woman knelt with a piece of chalk, tongue perched at the corner of her mouth as she wrote carefully in block letters, "Respect without rank." No hashtag, no logo, just chalk on stone, the kind of message Rain would someday take, leaving only the memory of a good phrase that had landed true. The young woman stood, brushed her palms on her jeans, and glanced at Marcus without realizing it was him. "Good reminder," she said to no one in particular, "for all of us." He looked down at the writing, then up at the sky. "It is," he said. A car slowed at the curb, then moved on. Somewhere, a church bell tested a single tentative note, as if clearing its throat for the hour. Marcus felt the lingering ache at his wrist where the cuff had been the day before and didn't look away from it. Memory should not be hidden. It should be metabolized. Jalen and his mother stepped out from the shade, the boy slightly unsure whether to approach. Danielle saw the pause and turned her body half open in that way that makes an invitation without speaking. "Judge Ellison?" Jalen said, voice quieter than the video would have led anyone to expect. "Just Marcus out here," he said, "and thank you." Jalen's ears flushed. "I didn't do much." "You did enough," Marcus said. "You did something that makes the truth harder to deny." Jalen's mother put a hand lightly at her son's back. "We're proud of you," she murmured. To Marcus she added, "And of you." He nodded, small, sincere, and watched them go, the stride of a boy learning how to carry a new piece of himself in public. Across the square, Mills came down the steps side by side with a woman who might have been his sister. Same eyes, same serious mouth. He did not see Marcus, or maybe he did and chose not to look. Sometimes the decent thing is to give a person space to be changed without an audience. A uniformed officer stood a discreet distance away, the first of the promised plainclothes rotating onto the block. He wasn't ostentatiously watchful, just present. It was enough for Danielle's shoulders to drop a notch. They turned toward home as the morning widened into day. On the way, they passed a bus stop where an older man sat with a newspaper folded to the editorial page. He had a cane across his knees and nodded to Marcus like men nod when words would complicate a good thing. The headline on the page read something about accountability in small letters and hope in smaller letters still. The fonts rarely match the weight of what they describe. At a red light, Marcus's phone buzzed. A message from Harris. "Working the thread angle. Camera caught a sedan lingering on your block last night. We'll be in touch." He typed back, "Thank you," and put the phone face down. There is a way to be careful without letting fear rent your whole house. They pulled into the driveway, live oaks throwing lacework shadows across the hood of the Prius. On the porch, Olivia sat with her laptop and a cup of something that steamed like a science experiment. She looked up, face a mosaic of relief and worry and pride. "Mom said you'd bring coffee," she said. "I bring what I'm told," Marcus said, handing over the extra cup. "How did the midterm go?" She shrugged. "Better than the morning, worse than the coffee." She studied him. "You okay?" "I am," he said. "Better with you here." Olivia set the cup down and stood, smoothing his lapel the way Danielle had. "I watched," she said. "When you said people don't need a title for dignity, one of my friends texted me the exact line. She's never texted me about court before." "Maybe she never had reason to," he said. Olivia's mouth quirked. "She does now." They went inside together. The house smelled like lemon oil and paper and the long comfort of a place that has held its people through more than one kind of weather. On the dining table, in the clear sleeve, the photograph waited. Danielle slid it into a plain envelope and wrote Savannah PD, evidence in small, neat letters. She placed it by the door for Perez. Marcus rested his palm on the envelope for a second, then lifted it, then let it go. He had the sensation of handing a weight to the proper shelf at last. He stood in the doorway and looked out across the street at the canopy, at the light, at a neighbor stooping to pick up a newspaper and wave. He thought about the last 2 days like you think about a storm that had taken a branch and left the trunk, and how the tree still stood exactly where it had been, still throwing shade. Respect without rank, he thought. Let it be more than chalk. Let it be muscle memory. He closed the door behind him with the soft sound old houses make when they're content. It's a funny thing how the smallest moments stay with you. I keep thinking about the way the light fell across that courthouse floor, the way voices softened when truth finally had its turn to speak. You could almost hear the years behind every step, not just the hours of that one long day. Folks came and went, lawyers shuffled their papers, and yet something unshakable lingered there. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, the tide had turned a little for the Black community that had been holding its breath for far too long. Justice, when it comes, rarely announces itself with trumpets. More often it arrives in quiet defiance, in a man refusing to bow his head when he's done no wrong, in a witness who speaks plainly, in a neighbor who remembers what she saw and won't be talked down. The lesson is as old as time. Hold on to your dignity, stand for truth with a steady heart, and you won't just reclaim what's been taken. You'll plant something better in its place. I've seen it before in my own corner of the Black community, when a single steady voice kept the rest of us from giving up. See, life has a way of testing whether our values are for show or for keeps. Sometimes the test looks like a courtroom. Other times, it's just the way we greet a stranger at a gas station. And if I've learned anything, it's that appearances fool us more than we'd like to admit. The man in the hoodie might be the one who holds the gavel. The young face in the crowd might be the one to keep the record straight. In my younger years, I used to think truth had to be loud to be heard. Now I know it just has to be stubborn enough to stay standing. Like a lantern burning low in a kitchen window on a cold night, a single act of decency can guide us through the darkest roads. That's a thing the Black community, and every community, understands when it's been through its share of storms. And maybe that's why this story will sit with me a long while. Not because it was perfect, but because it was proof that the right thing can still be done, even when it's the harder road. So take a little time, when the noise of the day quiets down, to think on what you've heard here. Think on the faces, the choices, the moments when it would have been easier to look away, and how someone chose not to. If this story's found a place in your heart, maybe pass it along to someone who needs reminding that truth can come from the most unexpected corners. Sometimes, that's all it takes to keep the light on for the next traveler.